What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of Cards Hub 365, powered by Graybar, your distributor for electrical and datacom needs. Find them online at graybar.com. Today, we're talking about the Cardinals and their Grapefruit League win over the Yankees at Roger Dean Stadium, 6-5. Some excitement there in the latter portion of this one after a start by Andre Pallante that we'll get into. Maybe not exactly what he was looking for, and we'll talk about what the implications of his performances right now could be, as there was a report from Katie Wu that, yeah, with her roster predictions, she said, you know what, that final rotation spot may actually come down to not like Steven Matz and Michael McGreevy, but potentially Andre Pallante, who is in position to potentially see his spot go by the wayside. And we'll talk about whether or not that makes sense. You can get your thoughts in as well in the comments section below. Let me know what you want to know about from today's Cardinals game or any of the Cardinals games so far. Any Cardinals-related topic is fair game today on Cards Hub 365. And make sure to share the video and all of our videos from Sports Hub STO with your friends and family so we get more people in here and enjoying the conversation. And there's a lot of sports conversation around the channel, and it's not just Cardinals stuff. But today, Cardinals is what we're focusing on. 6-5, Cardinals beat the Yankees. Let's talk about first the Pallante stuff. We will get into a little bit of conversation too, though, I imagine. Offensively, a few guys starting to perk up. Nolan Gorman is probably the biggest name that people want to see perk up, and he's really been doing that over the past few games, and today was 2 for 3 with a home run, so that's a guy that we're going to touch on for sure. Alec Burleson had a homer in this one, and so did Matt Koperniak. What could be the fit for Matt Koperniak on this roster if he continues to impress the way that he has done so far in spring training? So that's kind of all the topics I have coming into today, but let me know what some of yours might be as Gussie Busch cowboy hat, chimes in that the bullpen was lights out. Yeah, how about Chris Roycroft at the end of this one, shutting things down in the ninth inning was good to see. But, I said I was going to start Pallante, but we already have a comment in here from Bayo about another topic. So let's actually shift gears and talk Gorman first. We'll get into the rotation stuff here in a moment because both Pallante and McGreevy pitched today. Told everyone Gorman has been seeing the ball better. Brant Brown has said Gorman had to make the biggest adjustment out of everyone this year. And over his last 5 games, he's showing that it's working. So we're seeing, like I said off the top, a little bit of Nolan Gorman beginning to perk up. You had the home run today, 2 for 3. And really, you can go back. It has been now a 5-game hitting streak for Nolan Gorman. He was just 1 for 3, 1 for 4 in all the other games with 3 singles and 1 double. But that's progress, certainly compared to where he had been. And I think another key to mention about all of this is that over this 5-game stretch, only 2 strikeouts for Nolan Gorman in doing some quick math, 17 at bats. So he's starting to put the ball in play more. And even if it doesn't result in a hit on every single opportunity, the fact that the strikeouts are down for him over this period maybe tells you he's settling into all the things that he and Brant Brown worked on over the offseason. And it certainly could be that Nolan Gorman ends up being exactly where Cardinals fans and the St. Louis Cardinals team wants him to be when March 27th rolls around for opening day. So that's definitely a bright spot of what's going on right now. And look, I think my stance on this the whole time, even as Nolan Gorman struggled significantly out of the gates, was basically to say it's early March. If he's still looking like this when you get to mid-March and the season's about a week or a week and a half away and all of the at-bats are still looking like they were the first few games for him, really is that first week that he was struggling. Okay, if that were to continue, there would have been maybe some cause for concern, and you would have wondered, is it in the best interest of the Cardinals to put him in that opening day lineup and to give him that runway that had been talked so much about? Would that have been the best thing? Well, he didn't really have to show a lot, I think, to be back in a position where we're all saying, okay, he's deserving of that, of course. And that's exactly where he is right now. You're going to see Nolan Gorman play, whether it's at second base or designated hitter or however the machinations line up for this Cardinals offense. He's going to be in there, and we're starting to see the signs from him that you want to see. Toph Rocks. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Fun game. A lot of positives today. Bullpen guys look nasty. Scott looks great in center field, and Gorman looks solid in the field and at the dish. Yeah, and at the dish is, frankly, the most important thing when it comes to Nolan Gorman this year, because I do think there are some iterations of the Cardinal defensive alignment where he does end up as the DH, and that's okay. The runway that we're talking about with Nolan Gorman is really what can he do offensively, because it is his power that can really set the tone for the Cardinals. We can remember points over the past couple of years where Nolan Gorman has single-handedly carried things for St. Louis. I mean, he has been a force when he's going well, but when he's not going well, he's the kind of guy that you can't hide him anywhere. It's like his spot's going to come up every 9 opportunities in your lineup, and you go, oh boy, here we go again. And that's just not the spot you want to see him in 2025 with Brant Brown as the hitting coach, being able to work on some things. I remember back early in spring, and I've been back in St. Louis for a couple of weeks now since I was down in Jupiter, but had a chance to chat a little bit with Nolan Gorman, ask a few questions. John Denton and I were both there catching him when he was leaving the clubhouse. Said, hey, man, can you kind of talk about that offseason and what that entailed for you? And really, he brought it all the way back to last year in Memphis, the fact that he thinks going down to Memphis, and look, this is what he said that day, whether this is a longstanding opinion of his or not, but I think he's kind of come to terms with that. Going to Memphis at that time was maybe the best thing for him when you recognize the fact that he wasn't getting enough playing time consistently in St. Louis to be able to work on really any of the things that were plaguing him. That's got to be a difficult thing when you know you're drowning out there and the opportunities you do get, you go over. Maybe you get an at-bat off the bench and you strike out and things aren't going well. At that point, it was almost like, okay, let's get Nolan Gorman to Memphis. And whether that was something he resisted at first or was very happy about at first, I would assume not, because who wants to go down to AAA when you've already had more than a taste of big league action in your career? But to be able to go down there, and he said that helped him to reset himself. And then I think everything that he's done with Brant Brown this offseason has probably furthered that to be able to really get him locked into a spot. And this just goes to show, though, kind of what we've been saying over the past week or two. Early spring, there are guys that are working on things, and it's not time to hit the panic button until I think you get a little closer to the season. And now that we're starting to see him turn the corner, perhaps that is proof of concept that a panic would have been a little bit premature on him. I'm going to jump into the comments. The comment from Toph Rocks, Toppy Rocks, whatever it is. Somebody give me a pronunciation guide on that one. Mentioned the bullpen, so we'll go through a little bit too. I had mentioned that Roycroft looked really good in the ninth. Romero was also sharp with a couple of strikeouts in the 8th inning. And Michael McGreevy, I guess you can count on him as part of that bullpen. Goes 2 2/3, gives up just 1 run, scattered the hits, and the homer was the only run he gave up, and was solid out there, and certainly fared better than we saw from Pallante. But Pallante got the 4 innings, so it is a little bit interesting if it is the case, as Katie Wu of The Athletic has kind of opined recently, that she believes it could come down to Pallante versus McGreevy for that final rotation spot, which is not like overly shocking to hear that might be a potential thing, because they do want to install McGreevy in some way, somehow. And Pallante, another thing that even before today's outing, which was 4 earned runs, gave up a couple of homers, only walked 1 guy. So that's a good sign, I think, over the course of 4 innings that he only had 1 walk, because Pallante's problem when, before his resurgence this past year in the middle of the summer, when he came back as a starter, his issues when things weren't going well was you're a pitch to contact guy, but also giving up a lot of free bases to guys, which really puts the traffic on in those situations where you're pitching to contact. It's kind of a double-edged sword. And today gave up 8 hits. So like the contact found holes, found its way over the wall a couple of times against him. But I would say at least he wasn't also walking guys. The problem, though, has been for Pallante, the velocity has been down a tick, or maybe 2 ticks over the course of his last few outings in spring. And so is that something that his stuff isn't going to play as well at 91, 92 compared to, you can think about when he was really striving for kind of cementing himself in the rotation last year. He was at like 95 a number of times. So is the velocity something to kind of keep an eye on, and maybe gives the Cardinals some pause as to, just kind of penciling him into the rotation? Because that has been the way that we've approached it the entire offseason. Steven Matz, we kind of said, on paper, easy to go ahead and shove him into the bullpen if push came to shove and you didn't have any injuries in spring for your rotation. And so far, we really don't have anything substantial. It's the 9th of March. There's still, a couple, 2.5 weeks away from opening day. So things could happen, and you're definitely hoping that things don't happen. It's also interesting, too, that like Pallante's numbers before today in spring had been pretty good, at least in the ERA department. So you kind of wonder, like, would it be just kind of yanking him around again to have given him the opportunity last year? He took it and ran with it, was really one of your best starters over the second half of the season. And then because of maybe not looking quite as sharp in spring, would he be so low on the totem pole, so to speak, that he would be yanked out of a spot in favor of McGreevy, who's looked good? But I think you could end up having some similar concerns with McGreevy in terms of he's going to be a pitch to contact guy as well. So I would not overreact to the Pallante stuff, but I would keep an eye on that velocity, because I think that's something that if that ends up staying lower than what we saw last year when he was at his most successful, you could probably understand why the Cardinals would be compelled to take a deeper look at that. So we'll see if that ends up being the case. Topher rocks. Topher rocks. I can try to remember that next time. Okay, let's jump into your comments. You guys let us know. By the way, all you have to do to be able to comment on Sports Hub STL is just subscribe to the channel, and then your comments will immediately show up in the live chat. So would appreciate you guys jumping on board. Lots of St. Louis sports coverage coming your way all season long, all seasons long, depending on the sport. But we're just really getting going here with Cards Hub 365, which is powered by Graybar, your distributor for electrical and datacom needs, and you can find them online at graybar.com. Justin asks what the depth chart would be at second base. And I do want to take a little bit of time to talk about the outfield still, but I'll address this question now. Koperniak is another guy that we should be talking about. At second base, the way that I look at it, I guess kind of bleeds into that conversation about the outfield, right? Gorman's a second baseman if Donovan's in the outfield. And by the way, we did have Donovan scratched from the lineup this morning. Not sure that's anything to be alarmed about. The way that a Cardinals spokesman framed it, at least in the tweet that I saw from Derek Gould, was that they were just giving him an extra day, another day, for whatever reason. There's probably something going on behind the scenes, hopefully minor, right, that doesn't impact him into the season. So we'll continue with this conversation under the guise that Donovan's healthy and going to be ready to go for the season, and there's not some major setback that hasn't been revealed yet. But just remember that he did get scratched from the lineup today. I believe he was slated to be in left field. So if you have Jordan Walker fully healthy, that's the other thing too, because he's going to be in right field if he's healthy. If he's not, you look at that lineup you saw today, and that very well could be your opening day lineup. Just put Donovan in left field, provided he's healthy. And Burleson would be your DH. Gorman would be your second baseman. Now, there are a number of things that could change with that. Victor Scott was in center field and looks the part, man. I think I really am at the point where I would love to see him make this team. I think he deserves an opportunity to kind of follow up on what he did last year, which was not a lot offensively in his opportunities in St. Louis, but to maybe demonstrate the growth that he has had both at the plate and in the field, I think would be a relevant conversation. You had Mason Wynn leading off, and Victor was batting in the 9-hole. I just think that double leadoff aspect after you get through the first inning could be so compelling. Two guys that can get out and run a little bit. Would love to see the Cardinals have base running and stolen bases be a part of their game as they approach trying to find a way to score more runs this year, because they were 22nd in runs scored in MLB last season. And it was probably, you know what, if you have a medium, just like a 15th in runs scored, a league average offense, that team might have made the playoffs last year because of how good the bullpen was and the starters did just enough. But they couldn't score runs. Scott was 0 for 3 today, did have one strikeout, but on the whole has looked pretty good this spring, batting .333. But you do want to see that continue throughout the rest of the spring, I think, before you cement him into an opening day roster spot and probably ostensibly that center field job if he were to win it. But I do think that what we've seen from him so far has been impressive enough that it's got to be at least on the table, right? To think, all right, this guy has the prospect pedigree and he is showing more than what we saw from him last year. Granted, he did have a good spring last year, but continuing to look at him and see the way that progresses is going to be interesting. Excuse the the sound here as I was looking to do a little bit of a stat search, and Siani's name did not come up, so I have to change it. I think it's because he's not a qualified player, but I'm looking for Michael Siani's numbers offensively for the spring because we know that it's been down for him, and I found it here. I think it was because he was actually on the second page when sorted by batting average. He's hitting .045 for the spring. He's 1 for 22. And look, I know that the defense is impeccable from Siani. That's what you come to expect from him. But he's got to produce more at the plate in spring. He's not somebody that I think is such an incumbent that a player like Victor Scott having a really good spring doesn't potentially knock Siani out of an opening day starting job. Now, the question would be, do you still find value? Let's say that happens. Victor wins the center field job. Okay, that still aligns to Justin's question, everything else about second base, which probably could push Donovan back to the infield, because with a healthy Walker, remember, you'll have him in right, Newbar in left. But because right now Walker's not healthy, and maybe he won't be ready for the season, and that's another moving target with all of this, that's where it gets interesting, where you'd say, well, Donovan to second base and Gorman to DH, but then what happens with Burleson would be obviously the question. And Burleson homering today, I think he's got to be in that lineup against righties every single day. And probably what happens is an injury, whether it's this little thing with Donovan whether it's Walker not being ready, whether it's something else that we don't even know about yet, injury-wise, probably makes it end up working out just fine. Cowboy Hat says Burleson, Scott Walker, and trade Nootbaar for the outfield. They're not trading Nootbaar. They're going to see everything that Lars Nootbaar has, and ideally they're going to see it in a 150-game sample this year. And look, I don't even really understand some of the hate that Nootbaar gets, other than if you are so frustrated with the injuries and the fact that he can't be out there enough. Because when you look at his numbers, every single year that he's been a big leaguer, he's been an above-average offensive contributor. And you might say, well, what are you measuring that by? Well, I'll be happy to tell you. OPS Plus, which you can find on Baseball Reference, is a good little guide because they make it really simple. 100 is considered league average. If you're above 100, better than league average. And it actually goes by percent. So when he was a 111 OPS Plus this past year, it means he was 11% above league average offensively last season. He's been 115 OPS Plus for his career. The years go 103, 124, 114, 111. He's always had an OPS between last 3 years. It's been 788, 784, 758. So he's going down a little bit year by year. But still, again, I think if you had a lineup of 758 OPS guys, and I'm talking 1 through 9, I think you could end up competing pretty well. When you look at what are the averages for OPS across MLB, pitchers have been winning more and more in recent years. So when a guy trails off, almost 30 points in OPS, but only goes down just a smidgen when it comes to OPS Plus, there's a reason for that. It's getting harder and harder to hit as pitchers get better and better and throw harder and harder and have nastier and nastier off-speed stuff, breaking pitches, etc. Lars Nootbaar with a 758 OPS is just fine. You'd like for that not to be the best OPS on your team, and I don't think it's going to be. But if you had that as the fifth or sixth best hitter on your team, which I think you could make a case if you're mapping it out, Lars Nootbaar might be in that category. Maybe he's a little bit higher than that. But I actually don't think that's too bad. So the idea that you would trade Nootbaar is not one that I am necessarily on board with. But yeah, kind of circling back and closing it up on the conversation about second base, I do think it's a situation where it depends on what's happening in the outfield. And somebody else that you have to look at is Matt Koperniak, who homered again today. He could maybe play a little center field for you, too. They're trying to wonder, can Lars Nootbaar handle center field defensively if you had to? I think if Victor Scott didn't emerge enough to where he was getting a roster spot, you would start to consider a guy like Koperniak and or Nootbaar for center field on an everyday basis, simply because of the way Siani looks right now at the plate. I just don't know if that's something the Cardinals are going to run out there because of the quest for offense. I really like Siani as a player, but he's got to produce at a certain point. And it is still that early stage of spring where I'm not going to just say he's lost, forget about him. But you want to start to see, as we have with Gorman the past few days, you want to start to see that turnaround for Siani before I think you're going to devote a spot to him in your opening day lineup. Lucan Baker, as Topher Rocks mentions, is looking good. He had a nice swing, ended up getting thrown out at second base because he hit the ball so damn hard to left field into the corner and is not fleet of foot, as we would say. So he was thrown out, but a very good swing and has had good swings so far this spring. He could be a weapon off the bench or platoon against lefties. I completely agree with that. Here's the issue, though, that you could potentially run into, pending injuries, of course, but what happens if Victor wins the job for center field? Okay, so he's in your lineup. Your bench is backup catcher, which right now probably looks like Pages, with Herrera getting the nod more often than not behind the plate. I think he'll be your opening day catcher, although Pages will catch more than people think. And so that's one spot on your bench. You've got, let's say Baker gets a spot on your bench. That's two. You think you will have a guy that can play shortstop, basically, to be a backup to win. But unlike Brandon Crawford, it's going to be a younger player. It's not going to be somebody who's a prospect. So don't think Thomas Saggese. I would still be surprised if it's him. I think it's going to be more in that category of a guy who can play a little bit of everywhere, shortstop being one of those spots. So you're talking about Michael Hellman, you're talking about Fermin, and you're talking about Jose Barrero, who has also looked pretty good at the plate and has some athleticism to him. And I think could certainly fit on that in that bench spot. But I think that's something that you probably need. But if Victor's in center field, does Michael Siani not get a spot on your bench? And if he does, what does that mean for somebody like potentially Lucan Baker or maybe Matt Koperniak as well, who is looking really good and conceivably forcing his way into a conversation? I mean, he's got a 350 average and a 1059 OPS after his home run today so far in spring. Contreras, Koperniak, Lucan Baker, Ivan Herrera. By the way, when you talk about best hitters on the Cardinals, he's probably in that top four for me. Prieto also, all those guys that I just named, including Victor Scott. So Scott, Prieto, Herrera, Baker, Contreras, Koperniak all have 1,000 or better OPS so far this spring. Some of those guys like Prieto, I think, are, long shot to be on the roster, but certainly down the road, I think performing well in spring is going to give him a leg up if the Cardinals end up needing a bench spot that guy can play second, can play some third, and they're not ready to give a bunch of at-bats to that roster spot, which is like a Sajacy. If they're ready to give a bunch of at-bats to that spot, I think he's somebody that you get to May, June, and there's an injury or something, that's the way that could look. But if it's just simply a bench guy, you could see Prieto potentially working his way into that conversation down the road. The problem with him is probably not being able to play shortstop. But yes, my point with all this, I don't know how the bench is going to shake out. There's a lot of different ways it could go. To me, Luken Baker's got to be on it. He is the one guy in that conversation that you can say absolutely can provide you a meaningful at-bat off the bench late against a tough lefty. He's interesting. And Barrero's interesting too. So, and I may be forgetting something as I'm kind of talking through this on the fly, forgetting exactly what the bench could end up being. Very interesting, though, that you have some of these position battles starting to develop where, like, I would have said, yeah, I figured they went out and got Michael Hellman to be that, Brandon Crawford spot where he can play some outfield, he can play some other positions. But when Mason Wynn needs to blow, it's going to be, Hellman can play shortstop. But Barrero can play shortstop too. So he could certainly get that spot. The problem, as I've continued to mention with Barrero, is that he is not on the 40-man roster. So if they were to add him, are you giving up on somebody, or is there a long-term injury that allows you to kind of make that happen? So we'll see. Nootbaar can't stay healthy, and then a mention about the analytical stuff hasn't helped the Cardinals lately. I disagree with this sentiment. OPS plus is not analytics. It's not like this pie in the sky, deep analytics stuff. It's just like, are you producing offensively or not? It's a very simple formula. I'm not going to pull it up on the screen, but it's very closely tied to OPS, and there's a little bit of kind of luck factor that they take out of it. But OPS plus is a very simplistic when it comes to like analytics. It's not very advanced of a stat. If it's on the very first page of Baseball Reference, it's not bad. It's just gives you a quick guide of like, is a guy above average or below average? Again, OPS is a more valuable stat than batting average. Anybody who's seen me do videos has seen me talk about that. Batting averages can be useful in context, but it's only one part of the conversation. At least with OPS, you're finding out, all right, does a guy either get on base really well or slug really well? Because he's got to be doing one of the two if he's got an OPS above 800, or maybe he's doing both pretty moderately well, and that's how you arrive at that number. That just means he's a productive player. It's a very quick way to be able to find that out. So, no, I don't think that's too deep of analytics to be able to get into that conversation. Yeah, Justin, you mentioned Koperniak and Baker could make the roster. And look, could it come at the expense of a Michael Ciani? Conceivably, like if he struggled enough. But I also think that, and we'll see, like maybe Koperniak's defense is such that they say, well, Ciani's a better defender, but Koperniak's good enough that the difference he can make with his bat, and both left-handed hitters. So, there could be a notion that makes some more sense. Then you're not going to have Koperniak, Victor, and Ciani on the roster, I wouldn't think, because they're all left-handed hitting outfielders who can play conceivably all of the outfield spots. So to me, the one that you don't have a replica of is Luken Baker. You don't have a dude who can just slug off the bench as a righty, taking on lefties, and be that threat in your lineup down the road. And then when he does that, you say, well, he doesn't play a position, he's not very versatile. No, he's not, Luken Baker, but that's okay. You have him bat, and you have the other guys on your bench that can be that kind of utility knife to where whoever he pinch hit for, you can find a way to replicate the defense for the last couple of innings to have him just be like a mercenary who comes in to hit, and then he's probably done for the day, but that doesn't have to be the end of the world. I could definitely see there being some benefit to that. Chris says, beautiful to see the power surge. Go Cardinals. Yeah, I mean, you look across the lineup from today anyway. Nootbaar was 1 for 3, had a couple of Ks, but he's hitting 300 for the spring with an 831 OPS. That's pretty good. I mean, if you told me 300 average, 831 OPS for Nootbaar for the season, the real season that counts, I would say lock that right in. Arenado's struggling, but we'll see. Veteran, we know that he was down last year. A lot of other implications to what's been going on with him. We'll just end up seeing what that looks like. Burleson with the home runs up to now an 861 OPS. He's hitting 286 for the spring. So like a week ago, it seemed like nobody was hitting and you weren't getting any production anywhere. And now even Gorman's back above a 600 OPS after today's really strong outing. And he's been trending in the right direction for a handful of days. So up and down the lineup, other than you still kind of want to see Mason Wynn get going, and he's still just hitting 115. And I think there could be a conversation, too. If Victor Scott really emerges, does it make more sense to have him as the leadoff hitter and kind of flip-flop with Mason Wynn? Could also depend lefty versus righty. One bats, first, and then the next day he bats ninth because of facing a different type of starting pitcher. But yeah, Mason Wynn, I think is going to be more than fine and ended up with a base hit today. So we'll see what happens on that front. Gussie Bush's cowboy hat says there's no reason that this team can't contend for this awful division. I agree with the first part of your statement. There's no reason they can't contend for this division. I don't agree with the part that it's an awful division. Last year, I believe the Pirates were the last place team, and they still had 70-plus wins. This was a division that was pretty decent last year in terms of, not having any just bogus, terrible Chicago White Sox caliber teams. I don't think you have any White Sox caliber teams in it this year either. I sincerely doubt anybody in the Central's losing 100 games. You might not have anybody in the Central lose 95 games. Maybe 72 and 90 or so is the worst you're really going to see, because last year I don't even think anybody was quite that low. 76 and 86 was what the Pirates were last year. And you think the Pirates are going to be worse with a full year of Paul Skeens? I don't think so. They don't have a lot else, but they're young pitching with him and Jared Jones and Mitch Keller. That might be enough to get him back to 75-plus wins. And that's, they'll be looking for guys to take a step offensively. O'Neal Cruz, they need more from Brian Hayes. The Reds won 77 games last year. I'll pencil them in for more than that, honestly, this year. When you think about, Hunter Green should be I think Hunter Green's going to have a year where he's really lighting it up if he's healthy. And they've got some other pitchers. Their young pitching crop maybe didn't assemble the way they quite wanted it to, but they've got some good young hitters that if they can stay healthy, they've had some injury issues with that team, but they're going to be in mid-70s and wins. So, I don't think there's a true dog in this division, which is the part where it's I don't think there's a great team. I don't know if anybody wins 90. Last year the Brewers won 93. I think you set that over-under for the division winner and right around 90 and a half, 91. I don't think that's insane. Let me know if you disagree. I do think, though, the Cardinals have the pieces to be able to contend when you think about just getting to the mid-80s in win total. I'm not saying it would be what I would predict. And if you look at, the sports betting market, they've got win total 76, 77 and a half for the Cardinals. So there's a public belief that it's going to be a sub-500 team. But you can also look and say, well, they won 83 last year, and what'd they lose? Goldschmidt didn't produce for him, so it's not a big loss, at least on paper. I think in the clubhouse and defensively, you will definitely miss him. But with what he did last year, 715 OPS or 718, whatever it was, they could replicate that in theory. Rotation, that could be where you kind of get bit a little bit, because as much as Lynn and Gibson weren't guys that raised the ceiling of the Cardinals last year, they didn't get that ceiling outcome of being a 90-win team, they were steady, right? And right now you're going, well, can Pallante be that steady? Well, maybe today he wasn't. We'll see. Can McGreevy be that steady? Yeah, you're hoping that he can be. Can Michaelis and Matz be both healthy and steady at the same time? Because they were, between the two of them, neither of those things last year. That's not actually true. Michaelis was steady. He was steadily not very good. 5.35 ERA. And talking about his production, it's got to be better. And I think if he's got a 5.5 ERA, if you get through May and into mid-May, there are conversations to be had of, let's check those box scores down in AAA. Who's performing, and could there be a swap made? Steven Matz, I don't think the leash should be particularly long. But my point with all of this is, if those guys do exactly what they did last year, but just do it for 30 starts instead of being injured in the case of Matz, that's not great, but it's what you got from them last year. So where are you getting ostensibly worse than the 83 wins you had last year? Answer could be the bullpen, but I liked what I saw from Roycroft today. Maybe he steps up in a way that joins a Fernandez, joins a Liberatore, joins, you end up replicating or finding a way to replace that production from an Andrew Kittredge that you lost. You still have Helsley. There are ways that this Cardinals team settles into a mid-80s win total, but they definitely are going to need some guys to step up and do a little more than they did last year. I just talked a lot about this question because I don't fully agree with the idea that the division is awful. I think it's just a mediocre division. I don't think there's really any truly awful teams in it. Let me know if I'm wrong on that. Damian asked if the pitchers and catchers are working on throwing out base runners. We know how bad that was last year. Yeah, I'm sure they are working on it. Will they be better at it? This is going to be a results-oriented question because they're going to have to be. That was a huge area last year where I think you probably lost a couple of games as a result of that one little detail and niche of the game of baseball is that they couldn't control the running game. There were days where, and I guess it kind of like piled up on itself to where the days that it was bad, it was so bad that, like, yeah, we're not going to win anyway. But that's definitely a good question, Damian. I think we've seen a little bit better, but it's, again, teams in spring, too, are going to be running, you would think, more frequently to try to test things out. And I don't know that you've seen drastically different results just yet. But Herrera is definitely the guy that you want to see the improvement from. But to the point of your question, Damian, you also have to figure the pitchers need to get to the quicker to the plate in order to be able to help that out. Ghostface Gaming asks about McGreevy. Well, says McGreevy is better than Pallante, needs to be in the rotation instead. I mean, I don't know that we know that for sure. I think they have two similarly styled games. And if Pallante is throwing 94, 95 like he did last year, I don't think I would be comfortable just to declare that McGreevy is better. I think you will have them be in a similar tier, and it will depend on some luck factor as to who does more. And can they find a way to strike out more batters closer to a guy per inning to be able to kind of get rid of some of the bad luck that can happen to you when you're a pitch-to-contact pitcher? And keep this in mind. If both Pallante and McGreevy are guys that you're trying to lean on in that rotation, do you want to so quickly dismiss the notion of Michael Ciani in center? Miles Michaelis, another guy who fly ball contact is going to be a big part of his game. I get it if he's not hitting much. And maybe I think the hope would be that Victor Scott can take the steps forward defensively, use those raw defensive tools that he has, and basically be Ciani defensively, and anything you get above him offensively from Victor this year is a bonus. They could end up going that direction, but I'm not down in Jupiter to have kind of taken the temperature daily of Ollie Marmol as this is unfolding, because I would tell you when I left Jupiter that Ciani would have been the favorite for the job. I haven't been boots on the ground to be able to go, his demeanor is kind of shifting. He talked about it in this terminology. To know if they're thinking about it differently is certainly something that we, just don't really know yet. And Ghostface also mentions that Roycroft looks good and needs to be in the bullpen. Yeah, I think he will on that opening day bullpen. Just keep in mind, though, he's in that group of guys that has options. So even if you like him and he's got a 3.5 ERA, he'll probably still be down for Memphis for a few weeks at a given point in time. So we'll see. Another comment about Contreras, Burleson, and Arenado could all be 30-homer guys. I would say Contreras would be the most likely this year to do that. Gorman, I think, certainly could. Baker, to the point of this question, he won't play enough to do that. But if Baker were on the Chicago White Sox, I would love to see the batting line. Because I'm not saying this would happen, but you can't convince me he wouldn't be a 740 OPS, over 600 plate appearances with 30 home runs. You couldn't convince me he wouldn't do that, and that would play. But he's just a little further down the depth chart to where he's not going to have that opportunity in St. Louis. But a bench opportunity is better than no opportunity, and I think the Cardinals would do well to give him that chance, because I think it's better for the team to have a guy like him coming off the bench. Yeah, Bernal got a hold of one. Dead center field. He needed to probably get 8 to 10 more inches on that swing, and it was going to be one that the center fielder couldn't have reached up to take away from him. But he did. He smoked that ball. 6'7" center fielder out there takes it away. That was kind of one where you just go. You probably get some laughs and some razzing from the guys when you get back to the dugout after that one. What do we think of this rotation order? Sonny, Fetty, McGreevy, Matz, Michaelis. I think, again, I'm not ready to take Pallante out of it. I would love to see Pallante kind of find it back in his next outing, because the Cardinals, I think, fell victim at times over the past couple of years when they've struggled to making decisions a little bit rashly, a little bit quickly with somebody that they didn't really believe in. Like, they clearly didn't believe in Pallante before he had the resurgence. I'm not saying they were wrong. He wasn't performing, and it was tough to watch at times. But then he had that resurgence. It's like, can that equity mean something that you give him more looks here in spring rather than just look for reasons to replace him at the, because you're like with Michaelis or Matz, you're not looking for signs or reasons to replace them at the drop of a hat. If you were, you would have found plenty last year. So I think that would be in a year. Again, I'm not saying that it's not possible that they do this where they bump Pallante or start him in Memphis or whatever. I just think that would be a mistake in a year where you are basically saying we're going to give guys that could be part of our future some runway. I don't know if Pallante's here in 2026, if he performs enough to do that, but I know that Michaelis isn't, and I know that Steven Matz isn't. So why are we the logic would be, why spend additional time on those guys to find that out when you could just put Pallante out there and have him sink or swim, and then if that's a guy you need to replace for 2026. But contracts, talk. And I just think it's a shame that contracts talk in a year where you're paying them regardless. But this is the last year. It's not like you're impacting things for the future when it comes to those decisions. But I also am okay with Michaelis and Matt's getting 6 weeks. But should they get more than 4 to 6 weeks? If it's looking like it did last year, I would say no. I would have a short leash on both those guys, especially if you had people waiting in the wings. Now, the beauty of having them around for sure for that period is like you can find out how does a Quinn Matthews look in AAA? How does Pallante? How does McGreevy? If Graceffo's not in the bullpen, he's in the rotation, how is he looking down there? You've got a handful of guys that are on the cusp, and you can find out how do they integrate into their seasons and are they ready without just throwing their feet into the fire from day one. And then you can sort of say, what about injuries? If there's an injury, we've got some extra cover because we didn't force the situation. They won't do a 6-man rotation, though. They won't do that. And for the reason you said, Topher, is because you'd have less starts from the guy you do want to see a lot, which is Sonny. So, yeah, they won't do that. Anytime you hear 6-man rotation, kind of roll your eyes and go, okay, that's nice that you're talking about it. I've never seen the Cardinals do it other than for like a week when they've got multiple off days to where they can buy a guy an extra day. Like that's not a long-term solution for them. Henry wants to know if I think the Cardinals will make the playoffs. Wow, you're putting my feet to the fire here on March the 9th, aren't you? I'm strongly in favor of yes. If not, explain why. I love your coverage, by the way. 12-25. Go Cardinals. I got us winning the division and making a World Series run. That's from Henry. And Henry, thanks for the comment, my friend. I think that if I had to answer the question today, which I will be, I'm allowed to change my mind before March 27th. I'll give you my final prediction as the season begins. I would say no playoffs, but I would also not hesitate to say they're a 500 team or better. 82 wins or so, 83 wins again, I think is more than in play. And if you get a couple jumps from a couple guys, this team has a higher ceiling than last year's team ever did. That I believe. This year's Cardinals team has a higher ceiling than the 2024 team ever did at any point in that season. Here's what I mean by that. Looking at the roster on paper, there aren't these spots that are like the safe veteran that I think are going to be around the whole year. In the case of like a Michaelis and Matt, you would say, well, isn't that exactly what those guys are? They're only around because of their veteran status. Sure, but they could be gone by June if they don't perform. That was not going to be the case last year with a Kyle Gibson or a Lance Lynn, nor should it have been. Those guys performed and they were steady. You knew what you were getting from them. You also knew what you weren't getting from them, which was all-star caliber performance, elite, sub 3.2 ERA. You weren't going to get that. You're going to get about 4 ERA from both those guys, give or take. And that meant the bottom wasn't going to drop out on last season. You weren't going to lose 90 games again like you did in 2023. You weren't going to win 90-plus games very likely in very many of those ranges of outcomes last year. I don't think that was really in the outcome range for the Cardinals last season because you had 83 wins starting pitchers. And I think Matz and Lynn were really, really solid for what they were asked to do. They didn't get enough hitting around those guys to be able to have the plan that Mozeliak put together for the season quite work out to the degree that it needed to work out if you're going to make the playoffs. I think this year's team has a higher ceiling because what if McGreevy comes up and he's him, right? What if Quinn Matthews gets a look and he's him? The rotation has the ability to hit the moon this year. It also could flame out because you're relying on Michaelis and Matz for 40% of your rotation. What if those guys aren't good? And you do replace them, but the prospects that are unproven or less proven, like even a Pallante is less proven, those guys that are getting the bulk of the work, they end up not panning out. And then you're 5 or 7 games below 500. You get to July, you trade Fedde, you trade Helsley. Suddenly you're staring down the barrel of 90-plus losses, and it's not hard to imagine it happening. There's more variance, I think, for this season than any in recent memory. And that probably even includes 2023, where you did completely fall off the map. That team might not have had very much upside in retrospect. This team, I do think, has upside, but there's risk inherent to it because you're talking about, hey, we're going to play Jordan Walker and see what happens. We're going to play Gorman and come what may. That might mean you stink again, like 2023. It might mean those guys take a step. They're league average or better offensively. You compare him with Donovan, who's league average or better, Newpar, who's league average or better, Arenado, who should be league average or better, Contreras, who is certainly supposed to be better than league average, and maybe Victor Scott can try to sniff league average or Ciani. Herrera should be league average or better offensively. You should have a potent 1 through 9 on paper. Burleson certainly should be league average or better offensively. And then you can find a way with Sonny and the rotation to either sink or swim. But you're not in that safety zone of, we got Lynn, we've got Gibson, we know what those guys are going to bring. You kind of don't know what you're going to get from a number of these starters. So we'll see. And thanks again, Henry, for hopping in and for watching all the videos and commenting for sure. Going to wrap things up here. It's been 40 minutes. We usually don't do quite as long with these Card Sub shows. But we'll get to Chris's comment here, and then if there's anything on the way out. Ghostface says 85 wins for the Cardinals this year. Okay, we'll end on this from Chris. Nice to see Gorman with the double and the homer, as well as Baker continuing to drive the ball. Victor has cooled off, really pulling for him. Just a couple of days where it hasn't been the same, but I think Victor Scott is certainly somebody who will have every opportunity. And if he can finish the spring strong, the way he started it, he could win that center field job. Ciani could still win that job. He's got to bounce back offensively a bit, though. 1 for 22 so far. We talked about Pallante's rotation spot. I don't know whether they'll do it, whether they would sit him out for McGreevy. It could still be a moot point. A week from today, somebody could get hurt, and then you know you're 5. It's whoever gets hurt, he's out, McGreevy's in. The incumbents are all in, and that's who you roll with. But we'll see. All right, that's going to wrap things up for this edition of Card Sub 365. Appreciate you guys joining me. The first solo episode. Hopefully it didn't go too terribly. But we've been powered by Graybar, your distributor for electrical and datacom needs. Find them online at graybar.com. Thank you guys so much. Stay tuned to the Sports Hub STL channel all week long because the sports don't stop. You've got Mizzou going to the SEC tournament later this week. The Blues are always in action. Post-trade deadline, how did they end up looking? Had a pretty solid weekend. Grabbing that point last night against the Kings was, I think, important as well. So no matter what local team you support, we've got that coverage right here on Sports Hub STL. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to you next time. Peace. If I can end the stream.